We are in Genesis chapter 49, and we'll finish chapter 50 today. We have been studying in Genesis through a survey, and there's much more to be said about Genesis than what we've said over this past year. But here we come to the end of the first book of the Bible, and we see some death, we see some request for reassurance, and we see Joseph's death and the promise of God in ending the book of Genesis. So this is final instructions and encouragement to Joseph. So if you will, take your Bible, turn to Genesis chapter 49, and let's begin in verse 29, okay? Then he gave them these instructions. I am about to be gathered to my people. Bury me with my fathers in the cave in the field of Ephron the Hittite, the cave in the field of Machpelah, near Mamre in Canaan, which Abraham bought as a burial place from Ephron the Hittite, along with the field. There Abraham and his wife Sarah were buried. There Isaac and his wife Rebekah were buried. And there I buried Leah. The field and the cave in it were bought from the Hittites. When Jacob had finished these instructions, he drew up his feet into the bed, breathed his last, and was gathered to his people. Joseph threw himself upon his father and wept over him and kissed him. Then Joseph directed the physicians in his service to embalm his father Israel. So the physicians embalmed him, taking a full 40 days, for that was the time required for embalming. And the Egyptians mourned for him, 70 days. When the days of mourning had passed, Joseph said to Pharaoh's court, if I have found favor in your eyes, speak to Pharaoh for me. Tell him, my father made me swear an oath and said, I am about to die. Bury me in the tomb I dug for myself in the land of Canaan. Now let me go up and bury my father, and I will return. Jacob has called his sons in, and remember last week we saw that he gave them a blessing, or he critiqued their life. Both of them happened during that process. And he gave them those critiques and those blessings applicable to them, and they were appropriate for them. Now he has completed that blessing. And I want you to understand this. Jacob did not look at death as the end. Look how he phrased this passage that we read. Then he gave them these instructions. I am about to be gathered to my people. Jacob was not saying, this is the end of life. He was saying, I'm going to be gathered to my fathers. So he is looking, and he's not looking at Adam as being dead. He's not looking at Noah being dead. He's not looking at Abraham being dead. He's not looking at his father Isaac being dead, or his mother Rebekah, or Abraham's wife Sarah. He's saying, these are living people. I am going to be gathered to my fathers. Now look, what a wonderful blessing it is to have a New Testament promise given in the Old Testament. Because we seem to think as Christians that we've got a lock on this thing. Okay? That before Jesus came, they had to wait. No, listen, brothers and sisters. There was something there for them. And we'll also see that when Jesus died, he went into Abraham's bosom where these people were waiting for him. He was not going to dead people. He was going to living. God breathed into man the breath of life. That eternal breath cannot be snuffed out. God created man in his own image. And at the end of Jacob's life, what a testimony he gives here to say, I am going to be gathered to my people. He was certain that he was not ceasing to exist. He's looking forward to being with his people. and he has completed his course here in this earth, but there's so much more waiting. So I'm going to be gathered to my people. What an uplifting message to leave his sons with. His sons who are about to mourn his death for a period of 70 days. Physically, he dies, but he lives on eternally because he believes in the Most High God and he trusts him with his life. And he says, I'm going where these righteous fathers of mine are being kept, and I'm going there and be with them, my people. Now, he has a last request of his sons. Don't bury me here in Egypt. Don't leave my remains here in this foreign land. Take my bones home. Take what's left of me and bury it in the cave that Abraham bought from Ephron the Hittite, the cave at Machpelah. And please bury me there. And I want you to know that not only was Jacob going to be buried there, but Leah was already there. His mother, Rebekah, was there. Isaac, his father, was there. Sarah, his grandmother, was there. And Abraham was already there. Their remains were there. What was left of them on the earth was there. But they were already in the place that God had prepared for them. And that's where he's going. And he says, don't leave my body here in this land. I want to be taken home. I want to be buried in Canaan, the promised land. And can you imagine that looking forward to the resurrection, he is saying, I'm looking forward to waking up. I'm looking forward to seeing the promised land with my eyes, that God will resurrect these old bones back to life. It happened. Jacob's body is to be buried in Machpelah. Jacob knew his time had come. That's a beautiful thing about this, is that here's one time when somebody knew death is coming. Here in this life, we don't know that. Some of us may get a terminal illness, and doctors will give us a prognosis of how long we're going to live. But Jacob knew that at 147 years old, he's just about ready to go. And he's looking forward to it. So he knows when he's going to die. And look how he went. He was sitting up on his bed during the entire time he was blessing his sons. He was sitting up on his bed, his deathbed. He was sitting up on his deathbed with his feet hanging over, and he was speaking to his sons, and he was extracting their promise to bury him in Canaan. And he had told them that he was going to be gathered to his fathers, and now, how does he die? It says he draws his feet back up into bed. He lay down, and he breathed his last. What a wonderful blessing it was for those young men to stand around. I don't know if they were all young, probably some of them in their 60s at this point, and they looked around at their father, and they saw what a great man he'd been. And Jacob dies. Now listen, sorrow and mourning are perfectly natural and permissible expressions of our grief at death. It's okay. We know that we are saying goodbye for a time. We know that they won't physically be with us here in this earth any longer, but we have that promise of God that if we are born again into his family, that we will see them again in eternity. This morning, Joseph sees his father die, and he walks over and he kisses his father last time, and he mourns over him, he cries, he weeps. That's natural, and it's fine, and it should be encouraged. We should not be telling people who have lost loved ones in their family, buck up, it's just great. It's tough. You lose somebody close to you, you will grieve. It's natural. Even for Christians, even though we know that we're going to see them again, we miss them. So it's fine. Grieve. Then keeping his promise to his father after he has expressed his grief, he goes to Pharaoh and he asks for permission to carry his father back to Egypt, to carry his father back to Israel. And of course, Pharaoh gives that approval. He tells him it's fine, go ahead and do it. Now, I didn't realize the embalming process in Egypt was so extensive. Okay, we see mummies that have been discovered in the ancient pyramids that have lasted for thousands of years. This probably is the reason. He was embalmed for 40 days. After that, there was a period of 30 days that they mourned his loss, in addition to the 40 during the embalming process. I don't know if the Egyptians had something on us, but I don't think these bodies last quite that long any longer. But it doesn't matter, does it? It says in the Bible, ashes to ashes and dust to dust. Yes, with these bodies, physical bodies are going to die. And yes, there's going to be a grieving period. But yes, there is also the resurrection, and that's what Jacob was looking forward to. And Jacob was looking forward to be the reunion with those who had gone on before him. And so he died peacefully and expectantly, looking forward to the day of Jesus' resurrection. Boy, after securing the approval of Pharaoh to take his father's body back to Israel, and after they had taken him back, and I'm not going to read all these verses because there's a lot of them to read. After the funeral was over, and it was noted among the Canaanites that a great man had died, because not only were the Egyptians, not only were Jacob's sons and their families mourning, but so were the Egyptian delegates from Pharaoh's court mourning the loss of Jacob. This great man was no longer in this earth. Okay? The mourning was taking place. After they had done what his father had extracted the promise from Joseph to do, bury me in Canaan. And I believe that he was buried by Leah. Remember when we talked about in the beginning of this series, and we got to Jacob, and he was tricked into marrying Leah first. And we said to you, be careful in selecting your mate. Make sure that it's the one God wants you to have. Who does he wind up with? Who does he wind up lying beside until the resurrection? Leah. Not Rachel, whom he chose, but Leah, whom God chose for him. I want you to remember some of those lessons, because teach your children to look for the person that God selects for them. That's the way to choose a spouse. Now, they're back in Egypt. And the brothers get together and they decide, but what if Joseph wants to exact revenge for all the bad things we did for him? And he's already forgotten that. He's told them many times over. And so did Jacob remind them that Joseph had been sent on ahead to prepare the way for them. But boy, their minds are just working overtime. And I want to say this to you. If you don't learn anything else today, learn that non-issues don't need to be addressed. Just because you think something is an issue does not mean that it needs to be aired and somebody else address it. Address what's important. We see more arguments started in marriage over silly little things, don't we? And the important things are left undone. Hence we have a 50-50 marriage to divorce rate. Dubious and final instructions, boy. These guys got creative. Now, who was with Jacob when he first knew that he was going to die? Joseph. The rest of the brothers came in later. But they come to Joseph and they say, our father, while he was dying on his deathbed, asked us to remind you to forgive us. That's the way we like to play things as humans, right? I forgive you, but no, I'm just telling you that. I'm really going to harbor this inside, and later on I'm going to exact my revenge. But Joseph had a pure heart. He forgave his brothers for all they had done for him, done to him. And so, fearing the past is a needless hindrance. You know, one of the biggest hindrances to Christian growth is the fact that we entertain Satan when he comes and says, remember way back when you did this? When the blood was applied, sin and evil were forgiven in your life. And Satan coming to you and saying, remember when, has no bearing on what God thinks of you or your relationship with God. If you let him, he'll steal your joy with those thoughts. And this is what the brothers are doing. They're bringing back up the past and saying this is a hindrance to our relationship with you going forward. We have heard from our father on his deathbed, forgive us. Please forgive us. And then they get really creative. They invoke the God of their father in this process. Not only did Dad ask you to do this, but God, his Father, asked you to do this. We do the same thing today. We get a little bit overbearing in our Christianity and we say, oh, God wants you to do this. Listen, I don't know what God wants you to do, except for what he said in his word. And if it's in here and he's told you to do it, then do it. But as far as revelation of things that go on in your everyday life, you know what God is telling you. I don't. I'm not going to try to read your mind. And neither should these guys have said to Joseph, God wants you to forgive us. Needlessly addressing the past hurts, but Joseph is a magnanimous person. He gives them a reassurance anyway. He says this, do not fear. Let fear overcome you. Don't be afraid. You're far away from home, but don't be afraid. Don't let fear come in and steal your joy. Don't let it come in and interrupt the relationship that we have in the church family. Do not let it come in and interrupt our relationship with God. Do not let fear rule in your life at all, because faith and love will drive out fear. If you have faith, that's the opposite of fear anyway. It's fear in reverse. And so if you have faith, fear shouldn't even factor in. But don't fear. Joseph reassures them, God is God, and I'm not. Why do we worry about what man has to say? God's in charge. Our Father is so much more powerful than any man on the face of the earth, including the President of the United States, the Premier of Russia, the Premier of England, or anywhere else. And nothing that we fear in this world could disrupt our Father being in charge and in control. Nothing. God is God. I'm not. Third, you intended harm. God intended good. This is kind of a review of the reasons that Joseph is in Egypt. You intended to harm me, but God intended it for good. You tried to destroy. God saved. You don't be afraid. I will love you and provide for you. Joseph reassures his brothers. He tenderly encouraged them. And then for 60 plus years after that, he kept his promise. He took care of them and everything they needed. This next to youngest son in Jacob's family was a mighty man. And after all of that time, Joseph had lived 110 years. 60 plus of those he lived in Egypt with his family. He nurtured his family down through his own great-great-grandchildren. Not just his children, Ephraim and Manasseh, but Ephraim and Manasseh's children. And at the last part of that verse that I've referred to there, 24 through 22 and 23, says that he had Manasseh's grandson on his knee. He had lived he had been prospered out of adversity. God had blessed him, and God gave him a rich and long life. At 110, he's about to die. Joseph's encouragement, his last request, and his death are found in the last few verses of Genesis chapter 15. Then Joseph said to his brothers, I am about to die, but God will surely come to your aid and take you up out of this land to the land he promised on oath to Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And Joseph made the sons of Israel swear an oath. God will surely come to your aid, and then you must carry my bones up from this place. So Joseph died at the age of 110, and after they had embalmed him, he was placed in a coffin in Egypt. Understand that it doesn't say he was placed in a tomb. We don't know that. All we know is that he was embalmed and placed in a coffin. And then, some 400 years later, when Israel began to leave, Moses did not forget the promise that Joseph had extracted from his brothers. Take my bones up out of here and bury them in Canaan. He was going home. He left them with these encouraging words. I'm going to die. I'm no longer going to be your leader. God will continue to help you. And he will lead you. God will not abandon you, but will come to your aid. God will deliver you out of Egypt. God will lead you to possess the promised land. The request, take me with you. Take my bones with you. Not him, take my bones with you. And Joseph was embalmed, placed in a coffin in Egypt. So ends the first book of the Bible, with a grand understanding of death. Physical death is not the end. It doesn't even become a hiccup on God's timeline. Because we are not dead, we breathe our last here. And the next breath we take is the breath of God in eternity. What a wonderful God we serve. What a powerful encouragement it is that two men on their deathbeds would say, this is not the end. God will continue to bless you. And until he takes us home himself, until the Lord, or until the horn blows and the angel shouts, and we're all gathered to him, we are to serve him faithfully and let him lead us, come to our aid, and bless us in this life. And so ends the book of Genesis. We'll pick it up in the New Testament next week. We invite you to stand as we sing together.